Make sure you don't miss a thing. Go to starzology.com/newsletter and sign up. Welcome to the Starzology Astrology Podcast. I'm your host, Alison Price, and this time I'm bringing you an interview with professional astrologer CHARLY KING, who lives in Florida, the USA, and we're going to be discussing relocated solar return charts. So enjoy. So, CHARLY KING, welcome to the Starzology Astrology Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Excited to be here.
I'm very excited to have a conversation with you today because I know that you are a professional astrologer living in Florida in the USA.
That's correct. Sunny Florida.
Sunny Florida. And I mean, it's beautiful down there. It really is. It's absolutely beautiful down there. But today's topic, we're going to be mainly chatting about not only solar return charts per se, but also relocated solar returns, because this is something that you specialize in apart from other things within your practice, right?
Yes, correct. I do love solar returns in general, but the relocation of solar returns just gets that extra special depth to it.
Okay. So for those of our listeners who do not know what solar returns are, could you give us a brief overview of what is a solar return chart?
Yes. So, the simplest way for me to put it is the birthday. And that's really where we will expand from. It's that moment when the sun returns to the position it was in the day you were born, the minute that you were born. And we celebrate them. So, I know everybody is familiar with the impetus of how special a birthday can be. Maybe we don't celebrate all of them, and some we do celebrate more than others. But whether you know it or not, you are essentially celebrating the astrological return of the sun to where it was when you were born.
Right. So each year, every time around your birthday, this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, it's actually, I've discovered it's a day before it can be, and that is completely dependent on whether we have a leap year. Right. So, for example, I'm a June 25th birthday, and my current solar return was actually on June 24th. And I kind of like that as well, because while I get the flood of all of the happy birthdays on June 25th, I was celebrating a day before, So there are these nuanced technical parts of it where it can happen in and around that. But yes, it is essentially your birthday. And when you have a birthday, it's your new year. Right. It's that fresh year for you.
It's fantastic. And as an astrologer, what would one do with a solar return chart particularly?
So it's pretty cool because the fact that it's called a solar return kind of leads us already to understand that the sun is the main star. In all kinds of astrology, we look at different planets. We look at, Mercury's position. We look at what the moon's doing every month. But a solar return tells us that our focus is on the sun. And so a few of the things I like using a solar return for is this developed chapter of life. So this age chapter that you are in, and where the unfolding focus is, looking at where the sun falls in a sun-based solar return chart is so empowering, because you really can capitalize on what that year has to offer instead of spinning wheels or, looking in the wrong place. And it does have this aggregate year after year. Maybe last year, the sun's placement was in the first house for your solar return. And that's very physical body and direction. And then maybe the next year, the sun's position in your solar return is the 10th house. And so you can see how the prior year working on your body and your direction relates to the second year, the next year, where your public persona, your kind of vocation, your future is going. And they all paint very specific parts of this story.
Right. So, and then just to be clear, so each year at a solar return, not only would you maybe consider the birth chart, but your solar return chart is going to be different each birthday you have.
Yes, correct. Because these planets are still moving. The natal chart is that imprint. It's that base foundation. And the world continues.
Yes.
The planets continue to orbit. And so it's this, I see it as a big clock.
Right.
And as it unfolds, you're following like the timing, the tempo of that clock. So one year the sun will be in one house, the next in the other house. All the planets change, but you still have that crux, that basis of your natal chart, which is everything you should go back to. So, okay, your sun will forever be in, I'm going to use my sun here, the 12th house. And so what I see develop each year as the sun's position changes because of all the planets moving and changing consistently,
Right.
it's telling me the next part of my story that I can really work best with to do what's right for my direction.
It's a very interesting thing. It's a very but personally, I like solar returns as well, but I know that you specialize in it. But for people maybe coming in who don't really know much about it, it's another way of another layer to put over the transits, clearly, right?
Absolutely. It is a layer. And that's, I think, astrology is all about those layers. And that's why I understand that it can be, confusing and intimidating sometimes because there are layers upon layers. You have the, annual layers, which is the solar return. You have the monthly layers, which is the lunar return. You have the layer that is who you are when you were born. And so I think that's why I default to solar returns most of the time, because it is based off of that birth. It sets the energetic theme for each year. It
Right.
talks about the unfolding external circumstances that are happening in the world that you are born into. And so the marrying of having that natal chart foundation and watching the action of what happens to your sun each year and what is supporting it and what is going on behind the scenes, with the sun being that main star. Yeah, so that real-time stuff happening.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And just on a technical note, then, when would you consider that a new solar return is coming into effect?
It's interesting because obviously there is the day of your birthday, whether that falls, like we said, the day before or the day of. And there are so many online platforms where you can generate that. But in my studies, I've discovered that there is a 3-month period before your technical physical birthday. And I call it limbo when I work with my clients. And, if you're a month before your birthday and you don't know which way from up and down, you're doing something right, because you're in this limbo transition. It's the 3 months before you were physically born. And so that echoes 3 months before every birthday thereafter.
Right.
You would call it the final trimester if we were talking about the actual science of the pregnancy.
Interesting.
So it's that last 3 months. And the reason it is 3 months is because that is Mercury's final orbit, let's say, around the sun before your arrival. And so Mercury is responsible for going around and turning on, switching on the lights for every planet in the natal chart for that moment of birth. Right. And so we take that concept from the birth and applying that to the solar return. You start to feel the shifts and changes around 3 months before the birthday. And you do start to think, closing down that previous year, stepping into this next year. 3 months before the birthday is usually when people start saying, what am I going to do for my birthday? Am I going to have a party? Am I going to go on vacation? It's when you start to make those plans. And that's not just a coincidence. That's energetic alignment.
That's interesting. I like the idea about taking it back to the actual pregnancy, because in those last 3 months of pregnancy, basically the fetus is viable. More so now today than it was maybe 50 years ago with the technology. So that is a great way of also looking at it, that yes, potential is ready to be unleashed, if we could even put it that way.
Yep, 100%.
So that's super interesting. And then let's have a little chat then about relocated solar returns. Now, simply, what does that really mean?
So if you celebrate your birthday where you were born, so let's say you live in the same city, town, country even, the solar return is just calculated without any adjustments.
Right.
If you were to physically put yourself somewhere else, let's say you go to Miami, I'm going to choose somewhere near me, and you were originally born in London, the orientation of the chart actually changes. And the sun's position is always fixed because that is your sun position. It is going to be at that degree of that sign. And we know based on, natal astrology that the ascendant is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
And the ascendant is the point, obviously, from which house placements are calculated, the latitude, the longitude. And so the orientation of the sky above, whether you're looking at it on this, printed chart on a computer or eyes up to the sky, it looks different from the position that you're on within the planet. So when you change location, the horizon of your chart changes, and that entirely resets the house systems. And I think that's one of the most underlooked part of solar returns. It's that shift of the horizon, because there's power in it in terms of, okay, if I go spend my birthday in Miami, my solar return sun may perhaps be in the 12th house.
Yeah.
Depending on how that sun is looking for the year with all the applying transits from the real-time planets, what's happening in aspects, that may or may not be desirable. And so I first started playing around with the relocation, like, okay, let me see, where do I want my sun, basically? My sun is going to be the star of the show, and it's telling me the theme. As a 12th house sun, maybe I don't want a second year or another year of a 12th house sun. Is there something else I can do? And relocating elsewhere changed that longitude, latitude. Therefore, it changed the horizon. And then I found my sun over there in the 10th house. And exploring those potentials really makes you understand the power of creating your destiny. It's got to be mentioned that it's not always, I laugh when I say this, it's not always easy to do the relocation. One year, for example, I had a client who had a beautiful relocation if she went to Sri Lanka. And that just wasn't possible. She was a hardworking businesswoman. It wasn't possible. But to have the opportunity to understand how putting yourself in a different place, location, gives you a different perspective. That's what it is. It's the view changes when your location changes.
Right.
And so exploring that and deciding, can I circumvent something? Can I mitigate something? Can I actually elevate something if I position myself in a place where there's a different point of view? That is astoundingly empowering.
It's a great thing. It's that, and you would be plotting and planning this coming up to your birthday, saying, if I just stay where I am, my son's going to be in the 12th house, and not everybody wants that 12th house position. But if I go to, well, wherever, New York, Miami, I can get a first house position, which maybe that's what or a 10th house position, a more dynamic house position, right?
Exactly. And it's, you have to do the analysis. You have to continue to analyze the transits and such, because you can get carried away with the excitement of creating your next year's destiny by saying, give me a second house sun. The amount of people I've worked with that say, well, I want to focus on my finances, my income. And that's fantastic, but you do still have to consider the applications of all the other planets, because it might not be all fun and games, just simply repositioning that sun. The condition of the sun has to be great. The condition of, the other planets. Is there a retrograde happening at the time? And it's kind of funny because I sit there almost like a compass, if you will. If you imagine a compass in your hand and you just turn different directions and you watch that arrow kind of swing back and forth, the way it does that with the entire chart, you do have to consider where the other planets land, because you may be very excited about the second house sun for the year and have totally overlooked that it repositions Mars into your 12th, which may actually be more difficult and challenging than the original sun in the 12th in the first place.
Right.
And so we do focus on the sun first, because that is going to tell us, hey, this is the chapter's theme for the year.
Yes.
But all of those supporting actors, they matter too.
That's interesting, yeah. And those aspects will remain the same on your birthday, no matter how you're going to rotate that. So there is some subtlety in that, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
So would you say the
Absolutely.
big question is what sort of year are you for everybody's next birthday? What sort of year are they hoping to have, and perhaps which house would they prefer their son to be in? But if you do actually calculate your next birthday solar return and end up in a particular house you like, then you wouldn't necessarily need to relocate anything if that's the sort of thrust you want your life to go. Is that what we're saying here?
Absolutely. I think one of the key things to do is always start with where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where you are, if you look at that chart, and you can go as simple as making a, pros and cons list, or a, developments and challenges list.
Yes.
And I might have 5 developments and I might have 3 challenges. I'm going to give you an exact example. One year I worked with someone who the solar return actually showed a pretty scary vehicle accident for the next year's solar return. And so he said, absolutely not. Is there a way we could either alternatively interpret that, or can we mitigate it? So we moved the chart. He traveled to the location to avoid that situation. And on the day of it happening, he had the car accident. However, it was what I would call a fender bender.
Right.
Compared to what the chart was originally suggesting, with a Uranus involvement, a 12th house involvement, a 3rd house involvement, which was a lot more intimidating. And so, yeah, if you look at where you are first and decide how you may feel about embarking on that journey, you could, go on to relocate just for the fun of it, just to see what other places offer.
Yeah.
And then you have these. Have you ever seen the movie? It's the butterfly effect, I believe. So you get to choose the next step, but you must understand that next step isn't free of consequences in some way.
Right.
So having these options can make you feel more free, can make you feel that little bit more in control, especially in a world where it feels like control is very difficult to grasp.
Yeah, more free.
And yes. And so starting from where you are, I mean, there have been times when I've looked at mine where I am and said, I am not even going to explore elsewhere because I am so satisfied.
Right. With the solar return chart that's coming up for you, that's what you're saying, yeah?
Yes. And if it's satisfying, then there is no need to look elsewhere. My next step would be to say, okay, now let me look at the dates and the times and the forecasts of how that unfolds. Now, if it's not as satisfying, maybe I'll go 200 miles north and 100 miles west and then take a look. And a lot of the time, I find that people intuitively are drawn to places for their solar return chart that happen to be good. There was a client of mine who, for like 3-4 years in a row, he wanted to spend his birthday in Las Vegas. Now, outside of the obvious glamour and sparkles of why that would be attractive, every time we pulled the solar return, relocated from the East Coast to Las Vegas, there was something that aligned with his plans. He was in the middle of developing a very positive business in hospitality, and every time that solar return in Vegas supported it. And so, as much as it could be something that you generate to take a modicum of control, it can also be something that reassures you, like, hey, you are in tune.
Right.
You are in tune with where your life is going, and your body wants to be geographically in a location that supports it for your birthday.
So interesting. Yeah. Obviously, I'm assuming you do consultations on this. So if one of our listeners decided to come to you for this type of consultation, could you just walk us through what they could expect from you?
Yes. So we would generate the natal chart, because every solar chart is kind of a development of where that sun placement is natally. And one of the first things, the more fun things I would ask is, where do you like to go? And also, where do you not like to go? There are people who have, they're completely against certain places. They may not like this area for this reason. I know plenty of people who don't want to go anywhere cold, so, and with those lists, we would generate the, options of the location and initially look at the main points, which is the sun's house of theme. We would always consider those other transits. I would give them, not necessarily that pro and con list, but I would give them the stories. We would talk about the story for that year. The session runs about an hour. Most of the time I go over by kind of 15, 20 minutes because we get so lost talking about everything.
Yeah.
And we would do up to 4 relocations.
Okay.
And including on top of that, we would do current location.
Okay.
By the end of that, there is no decision needed to be made. And I always request a follow-up via email just to chat back and forth because,
What
sometimes
I actually did.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much information within it that it needs the time to absorb after the session. So the session would really be focused on 4 places plus current living location.
Wow.
And if your living location is different from where you were born, well, we're already working with a relocated solar return then. And so that makes it 6 charts that we work with because we do look at the birth location too.
True. And you and
it's
I,
like you,
yeah, we've both got that, haven't we?
yes, yeah. And every year, that's the first thing we have to consider. We're already relocated, but you put it perfectly when you said layers. And so we just start with that base layer, and then we look at the current layer, and then we look at the potential layers, and it just gives more opportunity and options.
Okay. So, but the choice still remains with the client, right?
It does. There is also situations where the choice is out of your hands, like when I gave my previous client going to Sri Lanka as an option, that was not a choice at all. And so sometimes it can be bittersweet to do this kind of reading because there may be this, almost 99% perfect chart somewhere in the middle of the Arctic. And planning that, the logistics and actually the desire to go there might not be there. Right. So it can be really humbling that you decide your challenges as much as you decide your theme. And I think that is quite bold.
Yes, yes. So that's quite interesting. So if somebody's coming along and they're saying, well, I'm not sure whether I should maybe vacation in, I don't know, New York or London, you would be able to then come and suggest their experience in the 2 places, right, for the year.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I would say London would give you a this flavored year and New York would give you a that flavored year. And then you sit with that and then you feel through that and you decide.
Yeah. So it's most astrologers, I would assume, cast their solar returns because they're all coming up. We've all got a birthday coming next year and we're all going to be knowing where we're going and giving some consideration to maybe it is right on a cusp somewhere and you could just move not so far to shift it, I would assume. How far would you generally say that you need to move the sun from one house to the other?
That depends on how deep into the house the sun is. But often I've found that 150 miles in one direction, which for me over here in the state of Florida can be the difference from I'm all the way down here in Key West. One solar return year, I went all the way up there to Pensacola. Yeah. And it was interesting because it simply shifted the sun placement from the cusp of one house just into the next one, but that was enough. So it can be as little or as large as is necessary to really harness the repeating themes and to really, work with those angular planets. Angular planets are going to be the specifics of a solar return relocation, really.
Yeah. So in general, you're not necessarily going to be telling people, oh, you've either got to go to Paris or Sydney, which are massive destinations, no matter who you are. But it could just be a case of, 200 kilometers down the road or something to make that gentle shift. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so subtle.
It's very interesting. Can I ask, what house system are you using for your solar returns?
So I work with Placidus. I do work with whole sign systems sometimes. I like to work with as many systems as possible because I quite enjoy the connection between all of them. But Placidus is my go-to because I've found that based on the specificity of that degree of the ascendant that helps in the timekeeping for the rest of the year from that birthday. Because the solar return, the joy of the solar return relocation, the excitement of the solar return relocation doesn't end when your birthday ends. It actually begins, because that is that starting point. If you would imagine the sun exiting, the hub of the racetrack, and it is now about to complete its rotation around that track, that really is the beginning.
And that solar return chart is setting the tone then for what the sun can achieve during that year because of its placement, particularly by house, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, go on.
You follow the transit sun through every sign thereafter.
Right.
And that's your calendar. That is your calendar. The way that when the sun ticks over December 31st to January 1st, we flip the page into that new 2026 calendar as it's going to be. That sun is your new calendar for the year. And so you can follow the switch of season in relation to the switch of themes. And because of how personal that is to you, it has proven to me to be so much more of an accurate forecasting method than even natal astrology itself.
Yeah. I mean, it's great, isn't it? Because I'm sitting here thinking, and of course, every time the sun, house the solar return sun is, that's going to change the ascendant as well in the solar return chart, and therefore the main tone as well too. So there's quite a bit of work from the astrologer's point of view to calculate all this stuff and do those interpretations. But from your client's point of view, they will benefit by subtly sometimes just making some adjustment in their life that they may have been planning to do anyway, to be elsewhere when the solar return actually occurs. Now, where do you stand on having to remain in that position, in that location after the birthday? Or do you believe that just because you were there at the point of the solar return, you're good because the chart has been set?
That's such a good question, because in my studies, I have seen people discussing both sides in the essence that, well, if you are, let's say, locking in a solar return for Las Vegas.
Yes.
The second that you leave, some people suggest that it may default back to where you're going. And I've followed that, and I can see how that might be, that might be relevant. But to me, I think it's more relevant because where you currently are, or where you return to post solar return vacation celebration, that is either your natal chart or it's your relocated natal chart. And so it doesn't, in my experience, remove or completely wipe the locked in solar return you had on that relocation. What it does do is it just adds another layer.
I agree with that. I think myself. Yeah.
We love layers. Obviously, everything is layers upon layers. It adds the other layer because you cannot deny the power of the imprinting of where you are in one moment, because that's basically what natal astrology is. My imprinting in Portsmouth, England, is still with me now, all the way over here in Florida, as much as my birthday celebration imprinting in Las Vegas will be brought with me too. And so it's just about being able to incorporate all of those things together and blend them as seamlessly as possible.
That's a very interesting way of putting it, because that is it, isn't it? That where your birth chart you take with you anyway, and therefore your solar return imprint you're going to take with you anyway, because we're all moving around all the time. And I like that. I like the way you put that, because I personally do like the solar return travelers, is what I call them, where they go and say, well, I'm just going to spend the day there because I want to capture the essence and the energy of that solar return chart, because you've got it then for 12 months in your back pocket, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. This is so interesting.
I love it. And I feel like I would really like to see a future where people understand the power of relocated solar returns and using them for their best years, using them for their growth and development.
Right. So if one of our listeners would like to contact you for a solar return assessment consultation, what would be the best way to contact you?
So I do have myself my own podcast. It's a weekly forecast podcast. It's the Horoscope Vault astrology readings. And within the descriptions and within the show information on there are my booking links where you can specifically look at, and it's one of my top purchased readings actually, is the solar return.
Fantastic. Yeah. And this would all be done over Zoom, I would assume, for your clients. I just want to make it clear for everybody.
Yes, 100% over Zoom. I feel like that is the best way to reflect back and forth rather than hitting someone with a pamphlet of everything that I've deduced. It's kind of, that feels empty and blank, and it can actually be more overwhelming. So yes, it's in person over Zoom with the opportunity to ask questions and pull as much out as possible.
Fantastic. So it sounds like a wonderful experience for anyone who's actually one of your clients. So I just want to say that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It's one of my most favorite readings to do.
So, Charlie King, thank you so much for joining us today on the Starzology Astrology podcast. Just to reinforce that you have your own podcast called the Horoscope Vault, and we'll put a link to that below this episode. And in my newsletter, where it goes out every Sunday for listeners who may be interested in exploring a different solar return outcome for their next birthday. I mean, why wouldn't you, right?
Right, yes. All the more power for doing so.
So, Charlie, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you spending the time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun to actually go back and forth and talk about the depths of this particular type of reading.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so to our listeners, if you found value in this episode, please do consider sharing it with anybody who would be interested. Make sure you're getting our newsletter, and you can sign up at starzology.com/newsletter. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the two main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer, or someone who's learning astrology, or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.